This is Capital Views, and I'm Mike Redder, and we have with us tonight Clive Thomas, who is a retired professor from the University in Juneau, UAS, and has written a book about Alaska politics and economy and policy. Clive, tell us what has inspired you to do such a work.
Well, Mike, I got to Alaska in 1980, and I didn't know anything about Alaska politics. I didn't know the governor was at that time. But I got very interested in it and contributed towards some books. And then in 1999, I did a book on Alaska politics and policy. And the book had been done before that by a guy at UAF, Jerry Macbeth, and Tom Morehouse. Some people may remember, left the state. But there'd never been a book that combined policy and institutions. And so teaching Alaska politics all those years, and for 25 years I ran the internship program in the legislature for the statewide university. I needed to put together a book I thought that covered policy and institutions. So I put this book together. It's entitled Alaska Public Policy Issues, the Dynamics of Values, Institutions, Personality, and Power. And it tries to set the scene of Alaska politics. It looks at the influences on politics. It looks at institutions. There's a section on natural resources and then a section on social services. There are 30 chapters, so it's quite a book. Actually a pretty good doorstop, I think, when it's produced. It's actually, I didn't author the book. I'm the editor. There are many people who contribute towards the book. Some people may know some of these people. I co-authored a chapter on policy with Fran Ulmer, so I'm sure a lot of people know Fran. I did a chapter on interest groups with Dave Donaldson, and I did some other stuff. Scott Goldsmith did a chapter on the Permanent Fund, which of course is a very relevant topic at the moment with all the problems in the state, and several other people.
Do you expect this book to be used how, as a classroom?
Yeah, well, it's a very interesting thing because Alaska is a very small market for these sorts of things. So when the University of Alaska Press approached me about it several years ago, and I've been 5 years doing this book, so it's been a long job, they wanted a book that would hit AP, advanced placement courses in high school, right through undergraduates, right through graduate students, but also be useful to people who came to the state for the first time. Say someone came from the Forest Service, to work for the Forest Service from Arkansas or from maybe North Dakota, and didn't know the state. They could pick this up and get a feel for the state, and of course a general reader. And
it's sort of designed so you can almost
yes.
take it in pieces.
Oh yeah, this is the way it's designed. Is that it was a bit of a challenge for me. This is actually my 13th book, so I hope it's not a very unlucky book. But I designed it so that the chapter begins fairly basic with explanation of concepts. Let's take the fisheries chapter, for example. It will explain different types of fisheries, some of the terms. Then it goes into a little bit of the history of Alaska fisheries. Then it goes into some of the problems with, allowing people to fish without controls, which is why we have limited entry. And then it goes into individual fisheries, the halibut fishery, and so on. And then it gets more complicated, and at the end, there's a section which sounds very intellectual, but it's actually kind of an interesting section on how does limited entry affect Alaska's populist democracy? Because, moving from a place where everybody thought they had access to limited access, where, let's face it, many people have gotten rich with their with their permits and everything, or not rich, but they could certainly make a few bucks out of it, $500,000 sometimes. So it looks at those things. It's not trying to push a Democratic line, a Republican line, whatever. It's just trying to be a book that people can understand the basics, get into a little bit more complicated analysis if they're interested, and for classrooms, generate discussion. Yes.
Or even professionals who come here.
Yeah, anybody. Yeah, professional.
You can then apply your own concepts.
I've done for several sessions some work for the Forest Service through the university, and some other agencies, and I spend a day talking about how to think politically, because a lot of scientists don't think very politically. And I can understand that. And then I talk a bit about Alaska politics, and Alaska politics is not that different from a lot of places in the basics. But obviously the policy issues tend to be a bit different. But it's just to sort of get people into this, and I think this is a very propitious time for this, because we're in the first session of the 29th legislature, and obviously things are different than they were just 6 months ago, so with oil and stuff, so yeah.
So this is really an instrument that's sort of a living instrument. It will not date easily.
No, because for example, what I do is the book is built around 12, what I call 12 characteristics of Alaska politics. These include fiscal conservatism, they include the role of Alaska Natives, it includes a political culture that I call dependent individualism, and maybe we can talk about a bit about that later. 3 strong branches of government, weak political parties essentially, not powerful but strong interest groups, and some various other things. Rural-urban conflict, which is always present underlying things in Alaska. So it's built around that, and at the beginning of each chapter, we identify those characteristics that might relate to that particular chapter. So it's meant to be integrated. It's not a bunch of anecdotes. Someone said to me the other day, well, all this is going to go out of date because you're going to be talking about Sean Parnell. No, I'm not. We're talking about some of the trends in Alaska politics since, a little bit before statehood, but looking at the characteristics of the way that Alaska's developed, the continuing problems that we have, obviously the roller coaster of oil prices and so on, and saying, what are some of the things we can learn from this? How can we apply it for the next time? So it's kind of semi-academic, but not too academic. It is a textbook in some ways, but it could also be read very easily by somebody who's, not just for political science people, basically.
Well, it sounds like a huge project, and that you really put a lot of your own life into.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, I spent about 5 years on it. I did leave UAS. I don't like to say I retired from UAS. I left UAS. I teach actually half-time, or at Washington State, and also I teach in Brazil. I was a Latin American specialist when I came to Alaska, and I wanted to teach it, and they said, where's that? We don't want any of that stuff here. You got to teach Alaska politics. And I said, well, I don't even know who the governor is, I didn't know who the governor was at that time when I came for my interview. But eventually I got into it, and I found it fascinating, and I taught it for 30 years, basically.
Clive, we're out of time.
Okay, sure.
This has been Capital Views. I'm Mike Bradner, and thank you.